Hello and welcome to all our viewers on CFO Insights. I am Sherry, a financial technology consultant at Hyperbots, and I'm very excited to have Jon Naseath here with me, who is an accomplished executive with expertise in AI, machine learning, and computer vision, driving impactful technology solutions in education, healthcare, and business. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jon, to discuss the challenges of invoice template standardization and how AI might offer a solution. Let's dive right into the topic with our first question. In your experience, what are the primary challenges companies face when trying to standardize invoice templates across their operations?
The main issue is that the invoice is the representation of your transaction with that customer. And just like there's every different type of transaction in the world, having to accurately represent that through a paper, a document, is complex. And as diverse as the transactions are, personalized invoices often create a similar complexity.
And how do vendors typically react to requests for invoice standardization? And what impact does this have on the relationship between vendors and clients?
Vendors usually want it to represent their point of view. So they'll usually want some customized language or some format that represents their business model. That creates complexity because it might just not be possible with the system they're using. Oftentimes, you're just like, well, this is what we can do, and then you end up creating an addendum or some other side document, which isn't ideal in any contract.
And from your perspective, why do you think there hasn't been a universally accepted standard for invoices, despite multiple initiatives like UBL and EDI?
Yeah. So that's kind of like one end of the spectrum to the other. It's either the customer wants it to represent their transaction, or are we going to align and kind of force all transactions to comply with the same transactional standard? And within different industries, you can use EDI as an example if you're doing high transactions of certain products. But oftentimes, again, if you're trying to represent the unique nature of the transaction you're doing, it just isn't applicable. I think there could be interesting opportunities per industry. And I have seen different standardization around like e-commerce transactions or things that go through, say, QuickBooks or whatever the ERP system is. But that's fairly generic and just isn't applicable to a lot of transactions that exist.
Right. And in the industry right now, some businesses prefer detailed invoices, while others prefer summary invoices. So, how does this preference diversity contribute to the failure of standardization efforts?
It really comes down to what is the nature of the transaction that you're doing. So if you have a complex multi-year transaction where there's a lot of details that go into figuring out that exact agreed to price, that can cause complexity in what might otherwise just be a simple line item in your transaction. Also, if there's contingencies or subcomponents that together they want to show how these subcomponents roll up to this overall product offering price, it's just the nature of what you're trying to represent and sell. If you don't do that, if you don't represent what the customer wants, again, then you often end up with like the invoice just becomes a one line item or very overly simplified document. And then you have the statement of work or the agreement that is more the details of what is actually, the service order of what is actually being done.
That makes sense, Jon. And how do system interoperability issues contribute to the challenges of invoice standardization? And what are the potential consequences for businesses?
Well, one of the main issues, and using that same example that I just said, if the actual transactional details of what your deal is going to be are not on the invoice, finance and accounting might not be able to have the visibility to understand what that transaction was for, or if something changes or needs to be different, which is represented in the service order, that can create a situation where finance or accounting just don't have visibility in the ERP system, in the accounting, accounts payable, to be able to see what this change was for, why it happened. And then they have to go back to the service order, back to the transactional details that are on a different document and try to understand what happened. So the more that the invoice can be an accurate representation of the transaction, it just helps everybody.
And can you share some examples from what you have seen in the industry of past standardization initiatives and why they didn't achieve the desired outcomes?
Sure. The main example that always pops out in my head when this topic comes up is we were trying to create standardized invoices across a global company where we had merged together 6 or 7 different entities that have been acquired. And we found that, overall companies we got standardized structure and line items all figured out and everything was good. Come to find out that, as an example, in Japan, the standard was that if you're going to have an invoice with a customer they have to pay, it requires a physical signature. And that was something we hadn't considered, the needing to be able to physically sign the invoice before sending it in. We were able to work around and find out ways to have a place where they could sign and print it out to be able to support their own need. So we had a standardized process overall, and then a option for where a unique region needed a specific requirement, how they were able to have their own exception, but overall recognize that the process could be standardized globally with acknowledging localized exceptions.
And since everybody is talking about AI, how do you see AI potentially solving the problem of invoice standardization by handling non-standard inputs?
It really just enables you to be able to step away from the structured requirements. So the invoices will still have their structured, call it baseline, and each company could have their own standard. But when you receive it as say an invoice, or you receive a bill from a client, the AI can enable you to read that and more accurately pull it in. So right now, as an example, you have to create new various standards based on individual vendors. And in this case, the AI can read it, digest the information, let you know if there's something to review, but more often than not, capture all the variations without needing to force the inputs to be standardized.
And what advice would you give to CFOs or our viewers considering AI-based solutions for handling non-standardized invoices in their organizations?
Be patient. It's coming. The technology is coming, and it'll be here sooner than I think. One of the challenges will be finding the right opportunities for the people who are currently manually doing a lot of that work, because AI is going to automate a lot of it and make it a lot simpler. You're asking advice to CFOs. Start looking at who on that team you can help coach up and train to do other areas that are more value add, because AI is going to be able to replace a lot of that manual workload that they're doing right now.
Thank you so much for these insightful answers, Jon. It's clear that while standardization has its challenges, AI offers a promising future to navigate these complexities.